So good evening, everybody. This is the Meditated 8 Big Book Club, and we're on step 4. And we're going to start the meeting with, as usual, with the set-aside prayer. And for those of you who are not familiar with it or with us, this is a version, you can write your own, that basically we say at the beginning of every meeting, and I'd like you to read it out loud because the whole object is no matter what you think you know, you're coming in here, as I am, to be taught something new, to have an open mind, not to be full of prejudice. And that's what this prayer is about. All right, Amy, do you want to kick us off with it?
Sure. Let's take a moment of silence to acknowledge the alcoholic that is inside and outside of the rooms and are still struggling inside and outside of the rooms, and to also invite our higher power into this meeting as we start this set-aside prayer. Okay. Dear God, please help me set aside everything I think I know about myself, my disease, the big book, and the 12 steps. Everything I think I know about the program, the fellowship, all spiritual terms, and especially about you, God, so I may have an open mind and a new experience with all of these. Please help me see the truth. Amen. Jill, do you want me to start with the instincts part? Okay. So, between Jill and I, and if anybody else is capable, like Gary, since you're posting the definitions in the chat, if anybody can just help me keep up with the pages, if I missed that, like posting them in the chat. But we left off at page 65 of the big book. And we started out with, on our grudge list, we said opposite each name are injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations, which had been interfered with? And so then it sets you up. And if you're going straight from the big book, it's got the 3 columns, and a lot of people add the 4th column. And then I've got some worksheets to show you in a second. But it's, what am I resentful at? Like, what am I mad at? What am I angry at? What am I fearful at? Like, what am, like Jill just said, what am I drinking at? Right? That's truly what you're looking at. But what we wanted to do, and I felt very helpful, just my personal, the way I had to handle it is when I met with my sponsor for the first time, I said, I just want to understand what the steps are all about. I don't understand. And I see them on the wall and I just want to run out the other door and all this stuff. So I did the 12 and 12 as like my first introduction to all the steps along with reading the big book. So in step 4, it talks about your instincts, right? And it says so I'm on page 42 of the 12 and 12, which Jill has referred to many times. It was written 13 years later in like 1953. And it's a workbook to go along with the big book after they had had a lot of experience, right? And it talks about creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, hold on, if y'all will pause with me for 1 second, I want to see if I can do something. I should have thought about this. Hold on. Okay, I got a great idea. So just stick with me 1 second. If you're in the recording, just hit fast forward. I'm serious. Okay. 1 second, and we're going to be there. Share. Voila. This is what I was trying to do. Did it work?
Yes.
Okay, so we can all be on the same page instead of me just reading in my book. So creation gave us an instinct for a purpose. So I'm reading off the screen if that helps you out. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there was no social instinct, if men cared nothing for the society of one another, would be no society. So these desires for the sexual relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, this part changed my life, often far exceeded their proper function. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desire for sex, for material and emotional security, and for important places in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires causes him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into a physical and mental liability. So step 4 is our vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities are in each of us and basically turn them into back into their asset.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
Jill, do you want me to go back to the book or did you want to go to that page 44?
I'm just gonna jump ahead. You don't have to put it up on the screen because I'm just going to ad lib what this is about. So you noticed what Amy had up there talked about our instincts. And this is where we talk about the good stuff that you've got in step 4. Like my sponsor said to me, Jill, you've got really good instincts. But unfortunately, when you drink, my instincts turn into the tornado factor and my fears come into play. So I use my instincts go out of control. And then it says I do damage. And if you want the reference to these, it's page 44 of the 12 by 12. And it says that it becomes a battleground for the instincts for which there can be no peace. So the active alcoholic is instincts running amok. I want sex. Well, when I'm drinking, that looks completely different than when I'm sober. I want money. I want fame. I want fortune. If I'm drinking, I may be the sort of alcoholic, which I was, that has delusions of grandiosity. You know, I had one employee I used to nickname plus one because whatever story you told, she'd done it bigger or better. Well, that was me calling the kettle black because at the end of the day, that's what I was like when I was drinking. I had to be the center of the attention. I was dominating, and I thought I could be the director and force you to like me. That is, again, an instinct that's gone out of control. The instinct for survival, the instinct to be social, the instinct to want to be liked, that's human nature. But when I drink, my instincts get very confused and become that battleground. Okay, then it says in the next paragraph, every time a person imposes his instincts unreasonably upon others, unhappiness follows. When I impose my instinct on you, you're going to feel crossed and you're going to shove back. And then we as alcoholics with our huge egos are all feeling affronted and full of self-pity because we've stepped on toes and the people that we are interacting with push back because we're stepping on their instincts. It happens in dating scenarios all the time. I push my sex on you, you push your sex back, you know, we have a fight. It's not about anything about intimacy if alcohol is involved, at least in my case. It was all about instincts run amok. That can also happen in sobriety. For those of you with long-term sobriety, if you're still trying to give your God-given instincts and push them on other people, here's the question of what you always ask with your instincts. What are the motives underlying it? If my motives in a social encounter of a sexual nature are because I want to be closer to you, and I really want to get to know you, that's a completely different picture than me wanting to have my own desires met and I don't care what the consequences are for you. So I can be sober, initiate a relationship, but I'm only thinking about what I'm going to get out of it. And when I'm done with you, goodbye. But I'm sober, so that's okay. This isn't how it works. So those of you who have long-time sobriety can often end up going back and doing a step 4 on a situation. Does that make sense to everybody? This isn't a one-time sanitize where we go in and, step 4 is about cleaning up the past. But what happens is as we mature in this program, we start to realize other things that might need cleaning up. And just because we've completed a step 4 and moved on, and in my case, I started to remember things I'd blacked out about. As I got more and more sober, I started to remember some pretty ugly things. Well, I'm going to be as healthy as my last secret told, right? So I've had to go back and do step 4s as I've uncovered more stuff. But okay, so then on page 44, it continues. This collision of instincts can produce anything from a cold snub to a blazing revolution. So other people suffer. This is a selfish situation. And we are so caught up in self and ego that when our instincts have run amok, and you guys keep seeing me put up 2 level hands, saying this is where I need to be emotionally, this is where my instincts need to be too. And if I get a little bit too sexy or a little bit too fear of losing money or whatever, watch out, chaos is going to happen. I need to stay here emotionally. I need to calibrate. I need to recalibrate. And what am I doing? I'm looking at my motives. And sometimes, and now apparently, according to my sponsor, more often than not, my instincts are good. And I'm acting on things the way God gave my instincts to use, just as Amy was saying. But it took a lot of work because I didn't know I was harming you. I was so caught up in my ego. I was laughing when we were preparing for this tonight with Amy, and I was saying, I lost count of engagements, relationships. There were a few marriages because for me, it never connected from head to heart. I was following my instincts. All of my relationships started drunk. So I ended up with people and in situations and even countries that I wouldn't have normally chosen had I been sober living. But that's just part of my journey and what I've learned. The point is, recognize the collision of your instincts. Your instincts aren't always bad. So I would highly recommend that you take a good look at the 12 by 12 on step 4. I personally did not find the big book gave me all the understanding of what I needed about this step. And that's why Bill and Bob wrote the 12 by 12 13 years later, is because after they wrote the big book, there was over this decade of experience working in groups, working with sponsors. Remember, sponsors didn't even exist when the big book was written. The idea is there, but nobody had done it yet. So we take the 12 by 12 a lot of times in our suggested readings and such, if you're working in a step group. And it's necessary, in my opinion, reading to get a full picture of how this works, because this one baffled me. But with this explanation, that's all we're trying to do, guys. Let's look at our instincts. They were God-given, so they're not bad, but let's see where they got out of whack. And then we're going to figure out why. We're going to look at the resentment and the fear that's underneath it. And then we're going to look in that last column at the attributes. What's the opposite of jealousy? Generosity. So how can I switch from behaving one way and now behaving another way? And Amy, you're going to have to explain the 4th column. So back over to you. That's all I wanted to say by way of hopefully giving you an overview of the idea behind this and encouraging you to not be frightened.
Okay, so I'm on page 65 of the big book. And just as a side note, I was in something and someone was like, oh my gosh, there's so many books. This is straight off the Everything AA app and it's free. So you can get the 12 and 12 and the big book for free. And that's really all you need. And then they also have the audio. So you can walk around and just listen to it. Anyways, I want to, since this is a big book study, so here's the way the big book sets it up. So if you're reading, this is straight out of it, right? It says, so this is how the app shows it, right? So you've got, I'm resentful at, so that's what people call column 1, the cause, column 2, and affects my is column 3. So I'm just going to read through, and you can read through, I'm going to read through them. Mr. Brown, I'm resentful at Mr. Brown. So this is Bill. The cause that I'm mad at him for. So for me, you can think about resentful. I've got resentment list if anybody needs one that my sponsor, my initial sponsor shared with me. It's just words that help me. I've got it all pulled up, but that's not what this is. You know, we're just going through the big book. But if you want any of that, I can share it with you. But words that kind of trigger you to think about what you're resentful at, people, places, and things. They talk about institution, people, places, and institutions, you know, and we'll get to that. So Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, and Brown may get my job at the office. So that's what's causing me to be mad or angry or resentful at Mr. Brown. What does this affect? It affects my sex relations, my self-esteem, my self-esteem. Oh yeah, because it's going through the causes, right? And security. Then Mrs. Jones, she's a nut. She scrubbed me. Committed her husband for drinking. He was my friend. She's a gossip. It affects my personal relationship and my self-esteem or fear. My employer, unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for my drinking and padding my expense account. What does it affect? It affects my self-esteem and security. My wife, she's misunderstanding and nags. She likes Mr. Brown, wants house put in her name. So this hurts my pride, or this hurts Bill's pride, personal pride, sex relations, and security. So we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. It's going to go to page 66. The first thing apparent was that this world and the people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves. But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. As in war, the victors only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. So it's just bringing up, and Jill, do you want to jump in here? I was going to show my other worksheet really quick on this one.
Okay, so just in terms of these worksheets and stuff, don't get hung up on the layout, and don't get hung up on the columns and having to fill this in. These are from workshops that different people have done. I've seen probably half a dozen of different ones of doing this.
Yeah, so, this is a very common one that I see. That's why I pulled it up. This is super common.
And it's from the 4-step workshop with Dallas B. And it's commonly circulated.
Yeah, it's just for me, I explained this last week. I'm just a visual. So I want to see what it's asking me to do. So I just want to show you too. So I'm resentful at the cause. And again, we're going to move on because we're not here to do a step 4. What part of self was hurt or threatened? And see, there's those items that he was listing. So this is copying the big book, right? So I'm resentful at, and it was Mr. Brown, the cause, his attention to my wife, told my wife of my mistress, Brown may get my job. What part of self did that hurt or was threatened? And he said self-esteem, right there. Sex relations.
Amy, if I could say one thing. Yeah, people are getting nervous because it looks overwhelming. To remind them that, their sponsor's going to write a couple of them with them and make sure they're writing it properly. They're not just going to be thrown to the wolves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Exactly. You guys, we're just going through the big book. So where was I to blame? This is what people say is the 4th column, is what was my part in it? So if you ever hear people, that isn't in necessarily the big book column 4, they do talk about it. It's also in the 12 and 12, but where was I to blame? I was selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate. So, and then you can be specific. This isn't meant to be by yourself. Also, you're right. So you guys, I'm just sharing the information. This is just a big book study. And Jill was mentioning a 5th column which is just off the cuff, is that you're talking about what's the assets. How do we turn these into a positive, right? Because in the 12 and 12, it says that our instincts go awry, becomes a liability. How do we turn them back to assets? So I'm just going to share one more, and then I want to move on or let other people take over, because I don't really want to go any further. I just wanted to share this one.
While you're changing the screen, just remember in that last column, and again, there's no replacement for doing this. We're not filling in these forms tonight with you. This is a subject that you go through with your sponsor in your step group. And, you know, the answers to these questions and certain resentments in people, you may decide you're going to go over this when you do your 5th step with somebody different than your sponsor. Like some of these you might want to share with your sponsor. Some of them you might want to share in a group. Some of them you may need to go to your minister or, you know, someone that understands your particular problem. And that is really important, that you feel comfortable with the person that you're sharing the information with. Not that they're going to use it in any way. I can never remember what people tell me, but it's got to be comfort for you to feel you can unload. And that can be a minister or a person that you don't even know, if that's what it takes for you to be 100% rigorously honest. And the other,
and we will get to that, because that's step 5 in the book. So we'll get there.
Exactly. And also jumping ahead, so you understand you're going to come back to this list when you're going to figure out how you're going to make it right with the person in your amends. Because you've written out in that 4th column what your role was in it. And so the next part of it, after you've figured out how to make it a liability into an asset, is that's the difference between an apology and an amends. How am I going to correct the situation? But right now we're focusing on, let's identify it. We can't fix something that we can't own. Back to you, Amy.
So the other one I have on the screen is more of a page where you just kind of work on one resentment on each page. I like them both. So it just shows you I'm resentful at, what's the cause, it affects and it kind of gets you going, like self-esteem, pride, ambition, security, personal relations, sex relations. So exact same thing. This is copy paste out of the big book. It's just, how is it presented for you to work out with your sponsor? Just kind of fun. And then you can see the 4th column, or what was my fear of being, right? Being taken advantage of, not respected, losing, unable to trust. So I just thought to me, these are very helpful, and I'm a very visual. So, and then your 4th column, where was I involved, right? Self-seeking, selfish, dishonest, afraid, harm. And then it goes on to the next one. These are just samples, right? I'm resentful at Mrs. Jones. So I just thought I would share those, and then we keep reading. Let me go back to sharing the big book.
Is everybody with us so far? Is anybody baffled or confused?
Yeah, do you want to pause?
I think everyone's with us.
Okay.
Okay, let's carry on.
When I'm sharing the screen, I can't see anything else really going on. So y'all have to butt in if I'm, and then, okay. So we were right here on page 66. So this first full paragraph of page 66. It is plain that a life which includes deep resentments leads only to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. But with the alcoholic, does someone want to keep reading?
While Amy's choking, look in the definitions on the side as we're going through here. Gary's got futility, uselessness, pointlessness, something done of no use or value. To squander means to use up, waste, throw away, consume. So again, these recordings are going to be available for you to go back to and listen to and write these definitions in your big book. So we're going to read some of them into the text. Carry on, Amy.
Sorry about that, you guys. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it is fatal. For when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again, and with us to drink is to die. So I'll pause there, and I hear in all the rooms, and everything I say is a parrot of someone else. Nothing is mine. That resentment is the number one offender, the number one reason people come back into the room. So that's why people take this, that's why this step is serious, right? And, you know, I want to be growing, right? Maintenance and growth of my spiritual experience. So I've had this pointed out. This business of resentment is infinitely grave, and we found that it was fatal. So those are some pretty, some pretty strong words basically about death, right? And to drink is to die.
I've got
So-
written in my column right there, death threats. I mean, let's not pussyfoot around this. This is Bill is telling us, infinitely grave and fatal. And then he ends that paragraph, to drink is to die. He ends the next paragraph in poison. He is not mincing words here. And then I just want to go back to that word squander. What squander? To squander not just for yourself. You're robbing everybody of your gifts, everybody of your love. You're wasting your life, right? We're saving your life, but you have so many gifts to give. I was squandering my life and depriving everyone else of what I can give. Okay, so that's super important, that this is infinitely grave, fatal. To drink is to die. It couldn't be pointed out any more clearly that he isn't just suggesting you do this step, despite what the big book says. Okay, carry on, Amy.